Okay, so um, plants and photosynthesis. So I'm pretty sure that you learned long time before that plants take our carbon dioxide, right? And they produce oxygen for us. Um, Oxygen is essential for life, and oxygen is actually uh, one of the major components, one of the major reasons why life developed and evolved on Earth, right? And it's believed that um, there were photosynthetic bacteria billions years ago that somehow were the first ones to be able to utilize carbon dioxide and sunlight energy to make food and to produce oxygen. Oxygen, as you're going to see, is a merely byproduct of photosynthesis. Oxygen is not how to say the target product for this process. The target product is definitely glucose, the carbs, right? So oxygen was just released without being utilized much, right? It was released and eventually it accumulated in the atmosphere. When it accumulated in the atmosphere, it actually was recognized by other organisms as a definitely as electron acceptor, but is an essential substance that could be used for energy production. And then you can say many interesting stories started since then, since accumulation of oxygen in the atmosphere. It took very long time to do so, super long time. And until now, what do you think? Where most of the photosynthesis takes place on Earth? In the water or on the land? Answer my question.
Isn't it land?
Mm-mm.
No, water?
Still in the water, yes. So I should say like algae. I should say still photosynthetic microorganisms that live in the water. They still the um, major oxygen producers, and um, still I believe all the forests and rainforests and just forests very important in this world. And I think planting tree is a very good thing to do. Um, but surprisingly, like water organisms actually way ahead in oxygen production. Okay, so it's this is like a summary, like you saw summary last week. So light energy, plant cell with the chloroplasts, right? Chloroplast is what makes plants green. Production of organic molecules and oxygen, right? And organic molecules oxygen utilized for cellular respiration, release carbon dioxide and water, the major component for photosynthesis. So basically plants and living organisms, they're complementary in their metabolism. But also keep in mind, you're gonna see it doesn't mean that plants don't utilize carbon, like organic molecules and oxygen for their own cellular respiration. They do. They also have mitochondria and they also breathe. Okay, so now this is a very important thing to like very important part of terminology. Autotrophs. Auto means self. Trophs means feeders. And these are organisms that can make their own food, right? Like self-feeding organisms. And they do this through the photosynthesis. Now, plants are what's called photoautotrophs. Photon means light, autotrophs means they kind of like, they don't feed on sunlight, but they utilize sunlight as a source of energy, right? And autotrophs or photoautotrophs are the major producers. What are producers? Guys, my question to you, what are producers?
They're the ones that make their own energy, correct?
Not exactly. So plants producers, what they produce for us, Jamaris? Oh, come on, that's so easy. Plants make for us
Carbon
Oxygen.
dioxide? No, oxygen.
oxygen and
Water.
no, plants don't make water for us. What they make? Food. Come on, that's the whole thing. Plants are producers because they produce food, right? Now, other organisms, what they do, they consumers. They consume the food. Those that eat only plants, how they called?
Vegetarians.
Awesome, Brianna.
Herbivores.
Herbivores, yes, they are herbivores. Those that eat plants and meat, they call
Omnivores.
omnivores, and those that eat meat only, they are
Carnivores.
carnivores, right? So herbivores, omnivores, carnivores. But at the bottom, right, you have producers. So you can say that, plant source of energy for what's called primary consumers, those that eat plants. And for those who eat animals that eat plants, right? And those who eat those animal who eat plants. So on the bottom of the food chain, pretty much, because one more time, they are producers. You see, they take carbon dioxide, right? And build a complex organic molecule that other animals can feed on. And you can see these are ferns, right? This is multicellular algae. You know what? This is not, say, algae could be what's called the colonies. Colonies means that look like multicellular, but it's actually many, many single-celled organisms combined together. But this is multicellular algae. This is cyanobacteria, bacteria that does photosynthesis. This is unicellular protists, more advanced than bacteria, also photosynthetic, like Euglena, for example. This is purple sulfur bacteria that it does photosynthesis slightly different way than others, but one more time, before I should say, like before animals evolved, there was this, right? Cyanobacteria, major source of the first atmospheric oxygen. So adult plants, they autotrophs, they make their own food. Heterotrophs, they feed on other organisms, right? So they consumers. Some consumers, also called decomposers. Decomposers, they like fungi, like some worms, some insects actually, what they do, they eat that organic material and process it, that it actually goes into the soil in a more simple form, right? So they are decomposers. A lot of fungi, they are very important decomposers in this world. And as I said, you can regard sun as direct or indirect source of energy for us, right? Direct for plants, for us indirect through plants, but you can see fossil fuels actually are remains of organisms that died a long time ago, right? But they still locked that sun's energy that we can use for, for many activities. Okay, and what do we have? So we're gonna get to the plants, right? Now, all photosynthesis takes place in the leaves, not like, other parts of plant can look green as well, right? And we think about, like, again, green color associated with photosynthesis, but no, leaf is considered organ of the plant. Okay, so this is an organ, like our organs, like heart, lungs, right? And in the leaf, you have different types of cells. So you have, for example, if you look this cross section, it's not really labeled much for you, but for example, this is called epidermis, like skin. Like we have skin with epidermis, and plants also have epidermis. They have veins, they have vessels, vessels to move water around, water and some other fluids. Plants on the bottom of the leaves have this like tiny mouths. Stomata literally means mouth. So tiny openings, and these tiny openings are for carbon dioxide and water and oxygen diffusion. And the principal cells that conduct photosynthesis are called mesophyll. Okay, so mesophyll cells. So in the mesophyll cells, you have large quantities of chloroplasts. Chloroplasts, I hope you remember, considered to be incorporated into eukaryotic cell a long time ago. We talked about endosymbiotic theory. Chloroplasts, they have their own DNA, right? And if you take a closer look at the chloroplasts, you can see that inside there are like structures look like a bunch of coins that stack one on top of another. They're called thylakoids. If you look at the one thylakoid, you can see that it has a space inside, thylakoid space. And actually, sorry, I forgot to tell you, chloroplast has two membranes, outer membrane and inner membrane. And there's a space between these two membranes. Okay, intramembranous space. So there's a thylakoids, there are thylakoid space inside, and inside the thylakoid, you have stroma, like levels, with the green pigment. Okay, so green pigment is called chlorophyll. Okay, pigment is the color, right? And this is the principal color in the plants. Okay, the principal pigment, chlorophyll. But there are other pigments, as you're going to see. So let's take a look at this. I think I didn't share sound with you. Give me 1 second. Let me start again. Sorry.
In these cells of Elodea, a water plant, the central space of each cell is occupied by a huge central vacuole, around which you can see cytoplasmic streaming. In the stream of cytosol, you can see mitochondria and also chloroplasts, the larger pigmented organelles. This movement allows nutrients and metabolic products to reach all parts of the plant cell. Credit Michael Clayton, University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Okay. So photosynthesis. So in photosynthesis, plants take 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, okay, 12 molecules of water, sunlight energy, and produce glucose plus 6 molecules of oxygen plus 6 molecules of water. Okay. Basically, what you can see, 12 water molecules taken, 6 produced. So you can actually say that, you can simplify it by saying that actually 6 molecules of water taken in. Okay, that's it. Water is essential for photosynthesis. So plants can't actually conduct photosynthesis without water. And so the reactants, you see carbon dioxide and water, and the products, glucose, water, and oxygen. What you can see here, please pay attention. You see it's labeled, carbon is labeled, this oxygen is labeled blue, red, and this are labeled blue. What you can see clearly that hydrogen will be taken as a part of glucose molecule and also part of the water molecule that is produced, right? So literally, what photosynthesis does is just like rearranges atoms of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, right? You can see that carbon is what's called fixed. You have you have molecules that have only one single atom of carbon, and you produce molecule that has 6 atoms of carbon, right? So you take like a simple units, right? And you combine them into more complex molecule of glucose. But you can see that this oxygen, right, from the water, this is the byproduct, okay? This oxygen is incorporated into glucose. This oxygen leaves, okay? Because it was believed for a very long time that you just like plants just literally like took this O2 and released from the carbon dioxide molecule. No, both carbon and oxygen from the carbon dioxide molecule will be utilized for synthesis of glucose. Water is a source of hydrogen, right? First of all, hydrogen is taking and oxygen can go. Okay. And you see, photosynthetic organisms need a hydrogen source, right? Which is water for most of the cases, but some bacteria utilize sulfur compound H2S, right? And this is the one. Those that utilize H2S are here. Sorry, going back. This is the purple sulfur bacteria. So for them, source of hydrogen is not H2O, not water, but H2S. Okay. And remember oxidation reduction reactions. So again, it's opposite from cellular respiration, right? So oxygen becomes reduced, right? And water molecule becomes oxidized, right? So exactly opposite from what we talked about last week. And photosynthesis is divided into 2 parts. One is called light reaction, the one that requires sunlight or just light. And light reaction is pretty much to pick up electrons and pick up and produce ATP that will be utilized in their synthesis, Calvin cycle or light independent reaction, which is actually synthesis of glucose molecules, right? So you can break it down like two components, right? One, use light to get electrons and ATP. The second one, when the light is not needed, is literally synthesize glucose molecule. Guys, are you with me? For a second, I want to see you with me, guys. If you're with me, can you please, you see this reaction top, like thumbs up or like any symbol. So I want to see it. Since I don't see your faces, please. That's it. Wow. One more time, guys. If you're with me, I want to see a symbol. Okay, I can teach 3 students. I don't mind. Okay. Okay, so this is a summary. And what you can see, this is the chloroplast, right? This is the whole thing inside the chloroplast. This is thylakoid. So thylakoid, this is like the one that looks like a coin, green coin inside the chloroplast. Outside the thylakoid is called stroma. And what you can see here that the first part, the light takes place in the thylakoids. Makes sense because for the light reaction, you need the chlorophyll, you need the green pigment. During this light reaction, you get ATP and you get an ADPH. If you remember from the last week, if you remember NADH molecules, they are electron carriers, right? So NADPH is the same from the same family. This is electron carrier. And these electrons are needed for synthesis of sugar. So you can see CO2 is taking in the Calvin cycle, right? And what you get their carb, right? You get the sugar basically, not the carb. Carb is a complex molecule. So one more time, light reaction, you need water, sunlight, ATP, electrons, oxygen is released. The next one, you need CO2, you need ATP, electrons for synthesis of glucose. Any questions here? Talk to me.
Can you go over that one more time?
Yeah, Professor. can you-
Sure. Okay. So photosynthesis has two parts. The first part is called light reaction. It takes place in the thylakoids, where you have the green pigment chlorophyll. You need this green pigment to take in the light, the sunlight, right? So light-dependent reaction, thylakoids take water, sunlight energy, produce ATP, produce NADPH, which is, they don't produce, sorry, they pick up electrons. They pick up electrons from breaking down the water molecule, right? So these electrons will be used later on along with the ATP. The byproduct of the light reaction is oxygen. So now ATP plus electrons plus CO2 outside the thylakoids in stroma of chloroplasts, Calvin cycle is producing, synthesizing sugar molecules, okay? So for this one again, CO2, ATP, electrons, and here you go, you get glucose. Make more sense? Talk to me. Is it
Yes.
clear now? Okay, great. So any questions? Guys, are you there? Leonardo, nice. I hope you listen. I think you do, right?
No,
Okay, great. So this is the video, which is a summary.
Plants provide us with food to eat and oxygen to breathe. They perform this amazing feat by the process of photosynthesis. Let's take a closer look. Photosynthesis requires carbon dioxide, which diffuses into the leaf through small pores and then enters the cells. Inside the cell, carbon dioxide diffuses into the chloroplasts, where photosynthesis takes place. Chloroplasts use energy from light to transform carbon dioxide and water into sugar and oxygen. Zooming into a chloroplast, we see these flattened membranous sacs called thylakoids. Here, light energy is converted to chemical energy in the first phase of photosynthesis, the light reactions. The two green structures you see here are photosystems, large complexes of proteins and chlorophyll that capture light energy. An electron transport chain connects the two photosystems. Notice the small mobile electron carriers that shuttle electrons from one large complex to another. Now let's take a closer look at the steps of the light reactions. The photosystem on the left absorbs light energy, exciting electrons that enter the electron transport chain. Electrons are replaced with electrons stripped from water, creating oxygen as a byproduct. The energized electrons flow down the electron transport chain, releasing energy that is used to pump hydrogen ions, the blue balls, into the thylakoid. In the photosystem on the right, light energy excites electrons, and this time the electrons are captured by an electron carrier molecule, NADPH. The high concentration of hydrogen ions inside the thylakoid powers ATP synthase, producing ATPs. The light reactions in the thylakoid have produced two energy products, ATP and NADPH, that will now power the production of sugar in the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle takes place outside the thylakoids in the stroma, the thick fluid of the chloroplast. At the beginning of the cycle, carbon dioxide molecules combine with molecules called RUBP. The resulting molecules go through a series of reactions powered by ATP and NADPH from the light reactions. Sugar molecules known as G3Ps are produced. Most of the G3Ps are rearranged back into RUBPs that will begin the Calvin cycle again. But the important product of photosynthesis is the remaining G3P sugar. Some G3Ps are used to build glucose, which can combine into starch or cellulose. Still other G3Ps form sucrose. And some of the sugar is broken down by cellular respiration using oxygen in the plant's own mitochondria, generating ATPs that can power other work of the plant. Excess oxygen diffuses out of the leaf through the pores, while more carbon dioxide enters. With three simple ingredients, carbon dioxide, water, and light, plants produce sugar and oxygen by photosynthesis, powering plant metabolism and ultimately providing your fuel as well.
Okay, so I hope this video made it more clear, right? So what I was talking about. Again, chloroplasts, thylakoids, outside thylakoid stroma, right? Light source of energy. Water is like our molecule that will be broken down in order to get electrons, right? At the same time, along with electrons, ATP will be synthesized. Oxygen is byproduct of the light reaction. Light independent Calvin cycle. This ATP, electrons, and CO2 will be utilized to produce sugar molecules. Any questions now? How about that? Does it make more sense? Talk to me, guys.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
Okay, so thank you. Solar power. Before we started to harness their sunlight as a source of energy, right? Before we started to build like solar power plants and how you call these things that solar panels, yeah. Plants were doing this since a long time ago. And what is light? So if you ever wondered what is light, light is their electromagnetic energy which travels in waves. And the particle in this wave is called a photon. If you continue into A&P next semester, you're gonna learn a lot about photons and light as well when you learn about the vision, how our eyes actually see. Not the same, definitely not the same way as with their plants, but there's some similarities, okay? So wave. Waves usually characterized by type of particle, nature of particles that form the waves. And they're also characterized by wavelength, which also corresponds to frequency, right? The wavelengths has it's like, literally it looks like a pebble. If you drop a pebble into the water, right? So you're gonna see the waves, right? The concentric waves. And the circles, they have a length. So the distance between the circles is actually called a wave, right? voice sound that we make is also shares very similar characteristics in this sense. Now, a range can be very, very wide, but if you're talking about light, about photons, photons give us a spectrum of something called visible light. Okay. What we can see super short gamma rays. We don't see X-rays. We can see UV light. Most of people can't see UV light, right? Only under special conditions. If you go to longer waves, you don't see as well. You don't see infrared, microwaves, radio waves. They're very, very long. But this is the spectrum from visible light. And I'm sure you're familiar with the rainbow spectrum, right? The rainbow goes from the shortest, which is violet, right? Purple, violet. Violet or purple? Violet. To red, right? So this is the visible light. That's what we see. This is the colors. Actually, our eyes can see approximately 30,000 colors, right? Yes. The only reason why we not really aware of that because we don't have names for 30,000 colors, right? We usually within the range of, I don't know, like maybe 10, 20 names for the colors. But even for example, if you go to our Home Depot and you want to pick up the color for the paint, right? Did you ever pay attention how many names they have in the catalog? How many? What do you think?
A lot.
A lot, yes. Like I think like 1,000 names, right? Like 1,000 names. Like for example, for the green, there are so many different shades of green, right? Our eyes can detect the shades. We just can't name them. Okay. So this is our visible light. Now, what we usually think about like cold colors, cold like blue, is actually have high energy. And what we consider like hot colors, like orange and red, they have lower energy. Okay. Now, what are the properties of light? So there are interesting properties. This is definitely not for bio class, but it's for physics. So what can happen with the light? So we have the rays, right? We have the rays of light. And again, they have energy. So light can be absorbed. Now, colors. Colors absorb and reflect. What is it? So if like, for example, you hit the wall with a ball, right? Some energy from the ball could be absorbed, but at the same time, the wall will reflect, like bounce the ball back, yeah? So the same happens with the light. White color absorbs 0, it reflects, okay? It reflects the light completely. Dark colors, they absorb the most, right? That's why if you put like a sheet of, like if you have, for example, car that is, let's say light color and you have the like dark blue color, which one will get hotter under the sunlight? Dark or light?
The dark.
The dark, because dark absorb the light. Okay. Other colors, it really depends. So they partially absorb and partially reflect. What they reflect, we see as the color, right? Chlorophyll we call like a green pigment. We call it green because we see green. We see the reflection of the light when it hits the chlorophyll pigment. Okay, so light could be absorbed, could be reflected. Like when you absorb it, you take the energy in, right? Light could be refracted. Can anybody tell me what is refraction of light? Anybody, what is refraction?
It's not reflecting light. Um, exactly. I don't know how to word it. I'm afraid I'm wrong.
Okay, so guys, for example, if you have a glass, like a clear glass of water, right? Transparent. So whatever is transparent, the light basically can pass through, right? Like you can see through, means the light goes through. If you have a spoon in the cup, in this glass, right? Did you ever pay attention that they kind of like look like odd, yeah?
It's like the bend, right?
Yes, exactly. That's what's called refraction. Okay. When the light hits the glass, right, the glass redirects the light. It kind of like bends it, right? So that's why you see that the tip is off from whatever's inside the glass. This refraction is super important in your eyes because in the eyes you have the outer part they call the cornea, right? When the light hits the cornea of the eye, it's called cornea. The cornea can redirect light to the back of the eye, right? That's how lenses work, right? Lenses in the microscope, lenses in the telescope, they all refract light. They redirect the light flow, okay? We're not going to really talk much about the refraction, but absorption and reflection is really important to understand actually how chloroplasts work. Okay. Yeah, so this is light, energy, and pigments. I think they're going to be very nice one to watch.
Energy and pigments. Sunlight is a type of energy called radiation or electromagnetic energy. Electromagnetic energy travels through space in a manner similar to the motion of waves in water. The distance between the crests of two adjacent waves is called a wavelength. The full range of electromagnetic wavelengths is known as the electromagnetic spectrum. What we call visible light, the wavelengths that our eyes see as different colors, is only a small fraction of the spectrum. The light reactions of photosynthesis use only certain wavelengths or colors of visible light. The thylakoid membrane in chloroplasts contains light-absorbing molecules called pigments. Different pigments absorb light in different wavelengths. One pigment, chlorophyll A, absorbs mainly blue-violet and red light. This molecule participates directly in the light reactions. Another molecule, chlorophyll B, absorbs mainly blue and orange light. We do not see these absorbed colors when we look at a leaf. Instead, we see the green wavelengths that are reflected back from the leaf or transmitted through it.
Okay, so you see, that was deceiving. Plants are not really green, okay? They just reflect the green light that we see. And I think like a lot of things related to vision are like probably for us, not exactly things what they are, but what our brain makes of that. If we had like a normal lab, they're probably going to work with a device called spectrophotometer. Spectrophotometer is a device that actually measures ability of different pigments to absorb certain wavelength, right? This is, you see, this is like a sort of light. It's called refracting prism. Refracting prism breaks down light into components, right? It's whenever you see whatever like breaks something into the rainbow colors, this is like refracting prism, exactly. Okay, so this prism passes through solution. This is a chlorophyll, right? This is photoelectric tube, and this one pretty much measures how much light was passed, right? The light that passed through, transmitted, is the light that was not absorbed, right? So once you know how much was not absorbed, you can calculate how exactly was absorbed, right? And what I want to show you here is the spectrum. So you see, high energy like purple, blue, low energy, the red. So in the plants, you have three major pigments. You have chlorophyll A, you have chlorophyll B, and you have carotenoids. So these two green appear to us as green. This one appears as orange. Carotenoid is present a lot in, for example, in carrots, right? And sweet potatoes. This is the major pigment that actually gives this colors to fruits and veggies, right? What you can see that chlorophyll absorbs mainly absorbs high energy, right? Blue. A little bit of red, right? So this is the absorption spectrum. This is called action spectrum for all of them. Action spectrum, again, you can see high energy, some low energy, okay? And this is the green spectrum that is reflected, the one that we see, okay? Now, chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, as I said, appear as green to us. Carotenoids appear as orange. So my question to you, did you wonder what happens in the fall, like right now? Why green leaves turn orange, yellow, red? Did you wonder why this happens?
Yes.
Yes, Jamarius, so?
Because it's just, I just always assumed that they were dying, so because of winter.
So, and when they die, they just change the colors?
I mean, when we die, we change colors, so yeah.
Really?
Professor, I assume it's due to the lack of sunlight. Like usually during the summer and spring, I'm guessing there is more sunlight which the plants are able to obtain. And during the fall and winter, there is less amount of time, which causes the leaves to change color and stop producing the green pigment. That's my assumption.
I should say, like, if I combine answers, like your answers and Jamari's answers together, yeah, they're gonna make sense. I should say the reason, yes, the leaves are dying. Why the leaves are dying? Because like most of the trees, most of the plants, they kind of go to sleep during the fall, right? But once the leaves are dying, their green pigment degenerates much faster than the keratin pigment. There's another pigments as well, so xanthophyllene as well. So basically green color goes away first. When this green color disappears, right, then their red, yellow, orange colors appear. Okay, now you can, when you see, for example, in these days, you're gonna step outside and you look at the trees, just remember that, what happened. It's beautiful, right? I really like fall. I like to see these beautiful colors, but at least you know what's behind that as a biologist, right? People who take biology class. Okay, so can I do this one more time? If you listen to me, I want to see the reactions. Pick up any.
Okay.
Okay, pick up any reaction here. Guys, listen to me.
Okay.
Hey, Jamaris, I know you listen to me. Don't have. I know they want to, right? They want you there. You listen to me as well. Okay, not bad. I have my people here. I have my people who follow me. That's great. Okay, so this is the spectrum of the light that is absorbed. And as I said, you have chlorophyll A, it's the major pigment. Chlorophyll B is accessory pigment. Carotenoids, again, it's the family of pigments. That's why you have a variety of colors in the fall. It's a separate group, and carotenoids, they also what's called photoprotective pigments. What is photoprotective? Light is an energy, right? And you have, like, you can use this energy, but this energy could be also a bit too much, slightly destructive. So photoprotective pigments actually neutralize the excess of light. Interestingly, we have the same photoprotective pigments in our eyes, right? That's why I'm sure you heard when you were kids. Have you heard that carrots are good for your eyes? Yeah, have you heard that?
Yes.
I've heard that.
Yeah, until now, yes. You know, not only in childhood, adults as well. Carrots are really good for your eyes. Okay, so this is a molecule of chlorophyll, which is a definitely organic molecule. Don't really worry about this. It has a head, it has a tail, right? Let's take a look.
In this space-filling model of chlorophyll, the magnesium atom at the center of the porphyrin ring is shown in purple, oxygen atoms in red, nitrogen atoms in blue, carbon atoms in green, and hydrogen atoms in gray. Credit, Jeff Harden, University of Wisconsin-Madison. Rendering created.
Thank you. Okay, so there are also more chlorophylls were discovered, like chlorophyll D, chlorophyll F, which also absorb high wavelengths. Okay, high wavelength means that, so it's crucial for certain plants that are growing in shades, right? Like chlorophyll F, for example, for cyanobacteria, if this bacteria not really exposed much to the sunlight, this chlorophyll is still able to, you know, to absorb the right pigment. Okay, so the variations basically on the chlorophyll depend how much the plant or organism is exposed to sunlight. And this is the carotenoids. As I told you, they are photoprotective, right? And then excitation. So, okay, so the whole thing about the photopigment that is able to absorb light is actually to produce electrons, right? Not produce, transfer electrons, right? And when the light basically hits their pigment, right? Electrons on the pigment go from the ground state, like, how to say, the ground state, that's where they are in their lower shell, right? Remember the atomic, like in the atom, there are electron shells. So it goes from the lower shell to excited state, which is goes to the high shell. And there it's unstable. If nothing happens, you see isolation, these electrons basically fall back. When they fall back, they release energy as heat and light, and the afterglow, this is actually called the fluorescence. Okay, so you know, some organisms, they do fluorescence, which is actually pretty much corresponds to all this interplay with the light. Okay, so you see chlorophyll molecule, photon hits, electron goes to excited state. If nothing happens with this electron, it falls down to ground state and releases energy as heat and light. You can see in this flask the fluorescence, but sometimes you do. Okay, so in the thylakoids, there's something called photosystems. So these photosystems are actually, they are basically, this is systems that take care of these electrons that are like these electrons that get to the excited states by their what's called light harvesting complex. And to do so, you need their pigment molecule, and you need a molecule that will serve as an electron acceptor, right? Electron acceptor like NADP, NADPH. And a light harvesting complex, usually, again, you have molecules that have pigments. And what they do, again, they transfer, just to make it simple, they transfer electrons, okay? And what I just want to show you here is, circus. Okay, just wanted to enlarge this. Okay, so this is the thylakoid membrane, right? Light. This is called the photosystem. So photosystem, again, it's a protein that has their pigment and their electron acceptor, right? So photons hit the pigment, and when they hit the pigment, from the pigment, electrons move like a wave from one molecule to another, to another, to another, to another, to another. Then they get to this chlorophyll within their center, right? And then these electrons go to the primary electron acceptor. Primary electron acceptor will relay these electrons to an ADPH. That's the whole thing. Okay. So what light does? It excites electrons on the chlorophyll, right? So these electrons move from place to place to place. Eventually they're picked up by electron carrier. There are two photosystems, major photosystem, photosystem 2, and photosystem 1. They named because this one was discovered first and this one discovered later, but this is the major one. Photosystem 2 is called P680 because this is the best range for the light absorption in 680 nanometers. Photosystem 1 is called P70 because it absorbs best in the range of 700 nanometers. And as I said, in the light reaction, the electrons flow. Two types, linear and cyclic. Linear, again, the pathway that relays electron. During this pathway, there is also synthesis of ATP molecule that could be used later on in their dark cycle. Okay. And to have they'll have a nice summary. Okay, it's broken down here like a steps. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about this and then you can take a break. So photon hits a pigment, right? Electrons get excited, and it excites their photosystem too, the P680, right? Then from P680, it's transferred to primary electron acceptor, which could be P680 plus because it also picks up one proton along with the electrons. Okay, then enzyme catalyzes split of water. So when water is split, right, it's basically provides source of hydrogen, electrons, and protons, and oxygen is released, right, which is a byproduct of the first part of photosynthesis. So now you have electrons from the hydrogen, perfect, right? Proton is released into thylakoid space. And then you have very similar, super similar thing to their mitochondria. So you can see here, electrons, they move. They move from one molecule to another. When they move from one molecule to another, the energy is used to pump protons, just like in the cellular respiration. So these protons are pumped. Again, gradient is created and ATP is produced. So this proton gradient actually used for synthesis of ATP molecule. Okay. So, and eventually, you get, this is the linear, right? From photosystem 2 to photosystem 1, electrons still travel until they reach NDPH, okay? So you have light here, you have light here, so they both facilitate this electron transfer. No matter how complex it looks to you, guys, seriously, no matter how complex, all I want you to pick up from this light reaction is transfer of electrons to the final acceptor, which is an ADP, and synthesis of ATP molecule. At the same time, remember, water molecule is split. Hydrogen is used as a source of electrons and protons, right? And oxygen is released as a byproduct. Do you have a nice summary here? No, I don't. Any questions, guys? Talk to me.
Wait, can you go back to the slide with the picture on it? Yes, that.
Mhm.
So it begins with light entering, and then it hits the.
Here's the chlorophyll, the pigment.
Yes, and then it transfer the energy into the P680, and then.
And then the water molecule is split.
Okay.
Now, look, something that I hope you or other picked up, like paid attention. Okay, so these electrons are excited, right, from the pigment molecule, right? So they excited and they actually, their energy is used to split the water molecule, right? So at the same time, the water molecule, oxygen goes, right? It goes away. From the water molecule, right, electrons from hydrogen will kind of restore the pigment, because pigments relate the electrons, right? So once water molecule is split, the electrons from the water will restore electrons here, and still they will provide source of electrons for the final acceptor.
Okay, so it kind of stops the pigments.
Yes, I should say light energy, literally, light energy is used to break down water molecule. Okay. The interest in water molecule is hydrogen only. Oxygen will be released, right? So this hydrogen will be used to restore electrons on the pigment, and also to be harvested by their electron acceptor. This electron acceptor will be needed for the second part, for the synthesis. At the same time, the protons from the water, from the hydrogen, the protons will create their gradient that will operate ATP synthesis. So again, this part, all it's needed, the hydrogen, okay?
Okay, the two hydrogen ions, okay.
Yes, so hydrogen is needed as a source of protons to synthesize ATP and source of electrons for later synthesis.
Okay.
Yeah, more questions, guys? Okay, so I'll see you in 10 minutes, okay?
Professor?
Okay.
Okay, so let's continue. I think we just jumped forward. Okay, so we were with the light reactions, right? So this is the photosystem complex. And there are two of them, photosystem 1, photosystem 2. And we just talked about linear electron flow. So linear electron flow is here, right? So light is used as energy to split the water molecule. Oxygen is released and hydrogen is used as a source of protons and electrons, right? And these electrons are related from one complex to another and eventually go to their primary electron acceptor, an ADP. And at the same time, protons are used as a proton to create proton gradient for synthesis of ATP molecule. So that's a linear one. And this, you see, light, basically what light does is kind of like, remember, brings electrons to our higher energy level, right? And they move down. So protons at the same time operate the ATP machine, right? They move down, and this ATP also, like the protons, also help to lift electrons to the next level for the final electron acceptor in photosystem 1. In the cyclic flow, it uses only photosystem 1. So photosystem 1, which is P700. And what happens here is when light hits, right, basically electrons relate in a cyclic way. They don't eventually go to their electron acceptor, but this circulation of electrons and protons creates, helps to synthesize ATP molecule. Okay, so this is the cyclic. Is regarded, I think it's regarded as kind of, you see, evolutionary leftover in organisms. So there is no need for them, for these organisms, there was no need basically to use electrons for further synthesis, but rather for ATP molecule creation, okay? And you can see some plants can usually that have it, they can grow in low light, but can grow in intense light in this case. So again, the linear is the one that uses both systems, and this is what used mostly by the plants. The cyclic, as you can see, they don't really utilize light much, but rather they utilize a water molecule for ATP synthesis. Okay. I mentioned chemiosmosis, right? I mentioned the proton gradient that is created to generate ATP. So remember, when electrons are relate, right, in the chain reaction, this energy, when they move kind of like downhill, that's the energy that creates the proton gradient. And the ATP synthase is coupled with this proton gradient to generate ATP from ADP. And these electron carriers, especially those that incorporate iron, are very similar in chloroplast and mitochondria. The ATP synthase complex is also very similar. And phosphorylation is different. Phosphorylation, like the addition of phosphate to ADP molecule. You see, phosphorylation is different because they get electrons from water here, while in mitochondria, the electrons and protons are from organic molecules. Remember, like they take glucose and remove hydrogen from glucose from the carbon core, right? While here, the source is the water molecule. Mitochondria actually uses energy to, like from the breakdown, to generate a lot of ATP. Here, ATP is used only for the synthesis, okay? So this ATP to make work, this ATP also to make work, but it's mostly to synthesize glucose. Here in mitochondria, protons pumped into the intramembrane space. In chloroplasts, protons pumped into thylakoid space. Okay, but this is the same idea for the ATPase. And there's like a summary here. mitochondria, chloroplasts. So again, one more time, major difference is the source of electrons and protons, and also what it is used for. Bottom line, we're done with their light reaction. Light reaction yields ATP and NADPH electrons. So now I go to the sugar synthesis. Calvin cycle. While again, light reaction on their thylakoid membrane, Calvin cycle is outside, it's in the stroma. So let's see the animation.
The light reactions. Light reactions are the steps in photosynthesis that occur on the thylakoid membranes of the chloroplast and that convert solar energy to the chemical energy of ATP and NADPH, evolving oxygen in the process. The key components of the light reactions of photosynthesis are the two photosystems, two electron transport chains, and ATP synthase. These parts are embedded in the thylakoid membranes of a chloroplast. The photosystems consist of arrays of chlorophyll molecules. Chlorophyll, the green pigment of leaves, absorbs light energy. The absorbed energy excites electrons to a higher energy level. Energized electrons from photosystem 1 are passed down an electron transport chain and added to NADP+ to form NADPH. Meanwhile, energized electrons from photosystem 2 are passed through another electron transport chain. Their energy is used to pump hydrogen ions, H+, from the stroma into the thylakoid compartment, creating a concentration gradient. Electrons leaving this electron transport chain enter photosystem 1, replenishing its lost electrons. Photosystem 2 replenishes its electrons by splitting water. Hydrogen ions and oxygen are released into the thylakoid compartment. This is where the oxygen gas generated by photosynthesis comes from. The buildup of hydrogen ions inside the thylakoid compartment stores potential energy. This energy is harvested by an enzyme called ATP synthase. As hydrogen ions diffuse through ATP synthase down their concentration gradient, the enzyme uses the energy of the moving ions to make ATP. Next, ATP and NADPH are used in the sugar-making process of the Calvin cycle.
It's the same thing. Let me just say if it's the same thing or different.
Zooming into a chloroplast, we see these flattened membranous sacs called thylakoids. Here, light energy is converted to chemical energy in the first phase of photosynthesis, the light reactions. The two green structures you see here are photosystems, large complexes of proteins and chlorophyll that capture light energy. An electron transport chain connects the two photosystems. Notice the small mobile electron carriers that shuttle electrons from one large complex to another. Now let's take a closer look at the steps of the light reactions. The photosystem on the left absorbs light energy, exciting electrons that enter the electron transport chain. Electrons are replaced with electrons stripped from water, creating oxygen as a byproduct. The energized electrons flow down the electron transport chain, releasing energy that is used to pump hydrogen ions, the blue balls, into the thylakoid. In the photosystem on the right, light energy excites electrons, and this time the electrons are captured by an electron carrier molecule, NADPH. The high concentration of hydrogen ions inside the thylakoid powers ATP synthase, producing ATPs. The light reactions in the thylakoid have produced two energy products, ATP and NADPH, that will now power the production of sugar in the Calvin cycle.
Okay, there's like so many times it was repeated the same thing. I hope you eventually got it. Okay, so let me do it one more time. Guys, can I get your reactions that you listen to me?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. 5 people from 20 listen to me. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, actually more. Okay. Okay. So, Now, Calvin is like, it's a Calvin cycle. Like we talked about there, when we talked about the citric acid cycle, right? So here you have a cycle as well, which means molecule enters, binds the molecule from the cycle, and basically you get the product and the cycle continues as well. So the whole idea for the cycle, don't really worry about this intermediate molecules. The whole idea is to take 3 molecules of CO2, right? Where you have single carbon in each molecule and actually bind them together. So Calvin cycle doesn't synthesize glucose molecule per se. It synthesizes molecule called G3P, where you have 3 glucose and 1 phosphate, right? But you have 3 carbon molecule that can easily bind to another 3 carbon molecule and create 6 carbon molecule, which is glucose. If you paid attention at the beginning, plants usually do glucose. They also make fructose, they make sucrose, and then they also can make a cellulose and starch, right? So the whole energy is pretty much utilized to take 3 raw carbons, right, from CO2 and get a 3 carbon molecule, which is actually huge, right? Still, it's huge. And it's operated, what you can see, it's operated pretty much by it's operated by 6 ATP molecules, but another 3 ATP will be wasted. So only 3 ATPs are taken actually for this reaction. Anyways, 3 CO2 enter the cycle. An enzyme called Rubisco, which is considered the most common enzyme in the living world, that's what's called a fixation. Carbon fixation, it adds carbon to the backbone of the molecule called RUBP, okay? So it adds 1 carbon, right? And then there is a series of, again, ATP molecules is used, electron carrier is used. This molecule is pretty much reduced to G3P. G3P, you have 2 of them. 1 G3P leaves, another continues into the cycle. Okay. What you have to know, 3 CO2 enter, 1 G3P leaves. Another G3P continues into the cycle. Okay. So you can see here, carbon fixation. So CO2 binds to 5 carbon sugar named ribulose biphosphate, RUBP, catalyzed by enzyme called Rubisco. There's a 6 carbon intermediate molecule will be split into 3 carbon molecules. 2 3 carbon molecules. So reduction. Reduction means electrons are transferred, right? Electrons are transferred and 6 molecules of G3P are formed. It's actually for every 3 CO2, which means for 1 CO2, 2 G3P molecules formed. Then, as I said, 1 leaves, another continues, okay? So that's why it's a cycle. What's important in the cycle, you have 5 carbon, you add another carbon, you split it in 2, right? 1 3 carbon molecule leaves, another continues in the cycle. So let's take a look here.
The Calvin cycle. During the light reaction, light energy has been stored in the chemical bonds of ATP and NADPH. In the Calvin cycle, this stored energy is used to produce sugar molecules. The Calvin cycle is a complex series of chemical reactions carried out in the stroma. The Calvin cycle begins with carbon fixation. 3 molecules of carbon dioxide are added to 3 molecules of a 5-carbon sugar abbreviated RUBP. These molecules are then rearranged to form 6 molecules called 3-PGA, which have 3 carbons each. In the next two reactions, products from the light reactions are used to boost the energy of these 3 carbon molecules. First, 6 ATP molecules contribute high-energy phosphate groups so that each 3 carbon molecule receives an additional phosphate group. 6 molecules of NADPH are oxidized, providing electrons to 6 3 carbon compounds. The electrons from NADPH reduce the 6 3 carbon compounds, creating 6 high-energy G3P molecules. G3P, or glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, is a sugar, the final product of the Calvin cycle. One of the G3P molecules represents the 3 carbon dioxide molecules fixed so far. The other 5 G3Ps are reshuffled to regenerate the original RUBP molecules. To summarize, so far the Calvin cycle has used the energy from the light reactions to reduce 3 carbon dioxide molecules and produce 1 molecule of G3P. 3 more carbon dioxide molecules are fixed to form G3P in this same complicated way. To make each G3P, the Calvin cycle consumes 9 ATP molecules and 6 NADPH molecules. These are regenerated in the light reactions. G3P is the actual final product of the Calvin cycle. The cell can combine 2 G3Ps to make glucose, which stores the energy that chlorophyll originally captured from the sun.
Okay, so guys, I mean, we can watch one more, and but I think again the main idea: you take 3 carbon dioxide and you get them bound together. You use ATP and NADPH.
The Calvin cycle takes place outside the thylakoids in the stroma, the thick fluid of the chloroplast. At the beginning of the cycle, carbon dioxide molecules combine with molecules called RUBP. The resulting molecules go through a series of reactions powered by ATP and NADPH from the light reactions. Sugar molecules known as G3Ps are produced. Most of the G3Ps are rearranged back into RUBPs that will begin the Calvin cycle again. But the important product of photosynthesis is the remaining G3P sugar. Some G3Ps are used to build glucose, which can combine into starch or cellulose. Still other G3Ps form sucrose. And some of the sugar is broken down by cellular respiration using oxygen in the plant's own mitochondria, generating ATPs that can power other work of the plant. Excess oxygen diffuses out of the leaf through the pores, while more carbon dioxide enters. With 3 simple ingredients, carbon dioxide, water, and light, plants produce sugar and oxygen by photosynthesis, powering plant metabolism and ultimately providing your fuel as well.
Okay. Any questions here about the Calvin cycle?
No.
Okay. Not really. Okay, so I hope it was broken down like well enough. Now, what plants need? Plants need carbon dioxide, plants need water, right? And what you can see for many plants, dehydration is a challenge, especially where it's hot. So plants came up with different approaches how to store water, right? So a lot of plants actually have like you see adaptations adaptations that help to keep water, and it's one of them is actually balance between photosynthesis and conservation of water. Why it's a trade-off? Because again, remember stomata are on the leaves that open up. They open up and carbon dioxide, oxygen can move in and out, right? If they close them to prevent dehydration, then they limit, they're gonna limit concentration of CO2 needed for photosynthesis. So you see, hot, dry days, they close stomata to keep water, but it limits photosynthesis. And once they reduce concentration of CO2, oxygen starts to build up. When oxygen starts to build up, plants go into something called photorespiration. What is photorespiration? Photorespiration is when rubisca binds O2 instead of CO2. And it produces carbon, but it produces 2 carbon compound. Those that do for this, for photorespiration, they call C3 plants. Okay. C3 plants, those that usually produce normally 3 carbon molecules, but in photorespiration, when they use oxygen instead of CO2, they produce 2 carbon compound. It's kind of, again, it's really, photorespiration it's really waste. It is a waste. It's a waste of oxygen and it's a waste of fluid. And it's believed that, again, it's happened during evolution and became what you see, evolutionary relic, because it probably evolved when there was more CO2 in the atmosphere and less oxygen. And you see photorespiration in many plants actually, as I said, it's really waste. And it's a waste, again, in the plants that have to protect themselves from dehydration. C4 plants, they minimize photorespiration. And a lot of plants are actually C4, like sugarcane and corn. And what is in the C4 plants happens? When it's hot, right, they close stomata, they reduce CO2, but they separated photosynthesis. They separated photosynthesis into different cells. They use mesophyll cells for the light reaction, but there are what's called bundle sheath cells where they have the Calvin cycle. I have a nice picture here. So you see, this is C4 pathway. So mesophyll cells generate ATP and ADPH, right? And this is the bundle sheath cells where they continue into their Calvin cycle. Now, what's the trick? The trick is having it in separate cells. You can really, really separate these 2 phases for light, for day, and for night. Okay, so during the day, they are generating ATP, and during the night, where they can actually open up the stomatas and get more carbon dioxide, they do their Calvin cycle. Okay. As you can see, they do their 4 carbon precursor, right, in the mesophyll cells, 4 carbons. Then it continues into bundle sheath cells. In the bundle sheath cells, CO2 is released and then used in the Calvin cycle. So basically what they do, they kind of like trap carbon dioxide, right, to continue into the Calvin cycle. So this is C4 plants. What else we have? We have, I think, the last part. 2 more things. We have cam plants. Cam plants, that's a succulent plant, which can conserve water. And they open stomata at night. And they incorporate CO2. Then they close it during the day. And then they conduct the Calvin cycle. And the pathway is kind of similar to C4 because this is the way C4 pathway is just the way to trap carbon that could be used later on in the Calvin cycle without relying much on CO2. Okay, so let's take a look here.
Different groups of plants have different adaptations for dealing with warm, dry conditions. Most of the trees and flowers that you're familiar with are C3 plants, which are well adapted to temperate conditions. In response to hot, dry days, C3 plants fully or partially close their stomata, which conserves water but also prevents CO2 from entering the leaves. As CO2 levels drop, the Calvin cycle runs out of CO2 and photorespiration occurs, decreasing photosynthetic output. C4 plants, such as sugarcane and corn, and CAM plants, such as succulents and pineapples, are adapted to dry climates. They can continue to fix carbon dioxide during hot, dry weather and avoid photorespiration. Let's look at how these plants fix carbon dioxide, starting with C4 plants. During warm, dry conditions, a C4 plant partially closes its stomata, conserving water. Some CO2 can still enter the leaf. An enzyme in the cytoplasm of C4 mesophyll cells has a high affinity for CO2 and can fix carbon into 4-carbon organic acids, which gives C4 photosynthesis its name. The 4-carbon compounds then move into the specialized C4 bundle sheath cells. In the chloroplasts of the bundle sheath cells, CO2 is released for use in the Calvin cycle and sugar is produced. A different adaptation to dry conditions evolved in CAM plants. They open their stomata at night, minimizing water loss during the cool night while taking up CO2. During the night, they incorporate CO2 into organic acids in the cytoplasm of their mesophyll cells. During the day, the stomata close, preventing water loss, but also preventing CO2 from entering the leaf. In the chloroplasts of the CAM mesophyll cells, however, CO2 is released from the organic acids that were made during the night. The Calvin cycle can proceed, producing sugar.
Yeah, so like if you pay attention, like acid, like succulent plants, like pineapple, for example, pineapple, the sourness of pineapple, for example, comes from these acids. So what these plants do, they accumulate CO2 during the day in the form of acid. And then later on from these acids, they take this CO2 to utilize for their photosynthesis, okay? So the whole idea, like in C4 and CAM plants, is to trap additional carbon, right? You get additional carbons that could later on continue as a CO2 into the photosynthesis, okay? And the rest is pretty much like we talked about why photosynthesis is essential. This is pretty much it. Any questions, guys?
No question.
Okay, so guys, my question to you, did everyone here today, did all of you take their quiz early on? Anyone here who didn't? Guys, anyone here who didn't take the quiz today? Do you hear me, all of you?
I took my quiz, Professor.
Yes, I know that you did. Okay, so let me just open it. I promise to go over the questions.